The Bible tells us that in the last days, perilous times will come. And folks, the powers of darkness are infiltrating our leaders, our country, our schools, our very way of life, our churches, and more than ever, we have to speak the truth. There is a high cost to telling the truth, but believe me when I say it's worth the price. So John chapter 8, this is like such an incredible story. Now, I was debating in my mind whether or not I should actually spend time getting into the general context of John chapter 8. Because the general context of John chapter 8 is one that is pretty powerful. John chapter 8 tends to be compartmentalized into like all kinds of different categories. But it starts off with a very interesting story, right? It starts off with a picture of an adulteress, okay? A woman who sins sexually. And I kind of want to start with that for just one moment. And then I'm going to take it to where we need to go because it becomes so incredibly powerful when you examine the advent of the discourse that we're about to read. So here's the story. I'm going to start in John chapter 8, verse 1. And it says this. It says, everyone went into his own house, but Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. Now early in the morning he came again into the temple, and all the people came to him, and he sat down and taught them. Then the scribes and the Pharisees brought to him a woman caught in adultery, and when they had set her in the midst, they said to him, "Teacher, this woman was caught in adultery in the very act. Now Moses in the law commanded us that such should be stoned. But what do you say?" This they said, testing him, that they might have something of which to accuse him. But Jesus stooped down and wrote on the ground with his finger as though he did not hear. Okay, first of all, I just want to, there's a couple of observations that I need to make right off the bat. The Bible tells us that these men say that this woman was caught in the act of adultery. Here's my question. How did they catch her in the act? And depending on how they caught her in the act, where's the guy that she was committing adultery with? Why aren't they talking about that guy? Is it possible that that guy may have been one of them? I certainly am not defending the act of adultery. I'm certainly not defending the act of sexual sin or fornication because it's one of the most singly destructive mechanisms deployable by Satan. But my question is, where in the world did they figure this out? How in the world did they know? Kind of an interesting picture. So they want to kill her. So they go to Jesus to find out what Jesus is going to say. And I love what Jesus does. Jesus ignores them. Jesus doesn't even answer their question. Now, we talked about this yesterday, right? How the way Jesus worked, the premise by which he communicated, he never did speak to the particular words that were being voiced to him. He spoke to the condition of the hearts of the individuals that were addressing him. So Jesus, as they're talking to him, saying, what do we do with her? Because, we think that she should die, basically. They wanted to be able to accuse Jesus, to say that Jesus doesn't have regard for the Old Testament law, and he was defending a woman who was caught in sexual sin. They wanted to destroy his reputation. By the way, I think that that is absolutely hilarious within the overall context of everything that's going on, because if you consider for just one moment what's actually happening here, you'll begin to realize that the real evil that's happening, the real wickedness that's taking place is taking place amongst the men that are accusing the woman. Jesus recognizes that, and Jesus does something that is deeply founded and based in truth. So he bends down, and as he bends down, he begins to write something in the ground. This is what it says in verse 7. So when they continued asking him, he raised himself up and said to them, "He who is without sin among you, let him throw a stone at her first." And again he stooped down and wrote on the ground. And then those who heard it, being convicted, notice that, that's what it says, being convicted by their conscience, went out one by one, beginning with the oldest, even to the last, and Jesus was left alone, and the woman standing in the midst. And when Jesus had raised himself up and saw no one but the woman, he said unto her, Woman, where are those accusers of yours? Has no one condemned you? And she said, No one, Lord. And Jesus said, Neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more. And that's when Jesus makes the statement, I am the light of the world. He says, I'm the light of the world, and he who follows me shall not walk in darkness, but have the light of life. Oh man, people were really bad. People were really, really angry with that one. So the Pharisees immediately go to Jesus and they challenge him on that statement. Jesus goes so far to end up telling them, you don't know my Father, because there is no relationship that's there. Jesus then gets into a very powerful distinction when he refers to what is going to happen to him in the future, what his departure is going to end up looking like. And then, after all this heated back and forth with Jesus just doing nothing but dropping truth bombs, as they would say, right? Jesus turns to his followers, and this is what he says. And I want you to pay attention to this because this is super important, right? Then Jesus said to those Jews who believed him, if you abide in my word, you are my disciples indeed, and you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. What? Okay, let's stop for a moment. Because if we know that we can find freedom in abiding in the Lord through surrendering to his word, then how is it that all of this stuff gives us nothing but problem after problem after problem after problem after problem after problem? Because it's spiritual, right? Because it's spiritual. Look what Jesus goes on to say. So they answered him, we are Abraham's descendants, and we have never been in bondage to anyone. How can you say you will be made free? Come on. We're not in bondage. We're not in slavery here. How can you say that the truth is going to set us free? We're not enslaved. Look at what Jesus says. Most assuredly, I say unto you, whosoever commits sin is a slave of sin, and a slave does not abide in the house forever, but a son abides forever. Therefore, if the Son makes you free, you shall be free indeed. The problem is this. In the midst of truth being proclaimed to a people who so desperately need it, freedom in the mind and the heart of the people that receive the truth and speak the truth creates bondage in a world of darkness, doesn't it? There's a price to be paid. You're called crazy, you're called nuts. They refer to you as somebody who's lost their mind, you're insane, you're a divider. You know, I've heard every kind of thing in the book. But here's the thing that we have to go back to because Jesus said it, and he made it clear, guys. He said, he who the Son sets free is free indeed. And the only way that the Son sets anybody free is if you do things the Son's way. If you go to Christ under his terms and you do it the way that God asks you to do it. And here's the funny thing about that. If you are following the Lord under his terms and you are doing it his way, you are going to stand in direct conflict with the world. Can I just also say this? This is not anything that's been just happening overnight. I hear a lot of people that tell me, oh, well, Pastor James, this has been happening. You know, it's amazing what's just happened in the last 3 years. Folks, the last 3 or 4 years has been a manifestation of the things that the devil has been working on in this country for the last 100 years. You guys get that? I've heard some of the most respected Christians in my book who are political analysts say that this is the product of the last 40 or 50 years. Charlie Kirk, probably one of the most brilliant men alive when it comes to political analysis. And he's a solid believer. Tells me, James, this is 40 years in the making, 50 years in the making, 60 years in the making. I disagree. I think he's brilliant. But I think this is 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 plus years in the making. Specifically concentrated in the United States of America, I think it's the last 100 years in the making. Make no mistake about it. It's easily the last 100 years in the making. Let's not forget this. Let's not lose sight of this. This is like super critical. What happened 100 years ago, folks? Can we talk about what happened 100 years ago? Do you know 100 years ago? Maybe a little bit more than 100 years ago, before the Industrial Revolution? Do you know that there weren't even high schools in the country? Most people didn't even know that. Elementary schools are pretty much what existed in the country. You didn't have high schools. I want people to think this through for a minute. Do you know that when the Industrial Revolution came into fruition, high schools became the construct of business owners in the Industrial Revolution? And the essence of those conversations were, we don't want parents who work for us to have to worry about investing time in their children, because we want them investing time in our organization. By the way, if you think that that's something that isn't happening today, you're out of your mind. If people look at the corporate world and say, oh, it's so wonderful that they make these places where you can pretty much live in their corporation, right? They have doctors on duty. They have, all of this stuff. They love female executives. And you know what they do with female executives? They treat them well. They make them feel as important and as special as possible, because the devil is remarkably good at getting people to understand how to take advantage of specific areas that God has created within the emotional makeup of an individual, to rip them off in order to pull them away for God's intended call or purpose. Do you know that the call that God places upon women to be mothers is such a remarkable call? It's beyond anybody's capacity to be able to really, truly understand. Mothers have such an incredibly powerful understanding of so many areas as it relates to children and family. Satan knows that women, once effective in the area that God has called them to be effective, will have the greatest effect on a society turning their hearts towards the Lord, which is why he seriously seeks to attack women all the time. The transgender movement that's going on right now has absolutely nothing to do with anything other than Satan's attempt to seek to destroy women. He wants to confuse the roles. That's exactly what he's doing, and he's very good at doing it. He does this, and he does this well. So women in corporate America is a really, really interesting kind of a thought, in that business owners who are inspired on many occasions by things that are not from above will harness the need of a woman emotionally to belong, build, construct, and even nurture, and will promise them and enable them to experience these long, drawn-out careers. They're telling them to do things like save their eggs, all kinds of things, so that when they become of age at the right time, they can still have children. When in reality, all they're doing is convincing women to throw away everything that God has ever called them to do and not experience the fullness of everything. Do you know that I've never, ever seen an interview or heard from a woman who lived a full life in corporate America while denying a family and getting married or being a part of all the traditional things that God has created for them, who has said that they did not regret it? They all say the same thing. They allowed their life to be ripped off from them. Because that's how the devil works, folks. That's how good the devil is. He is remarkable at this. He's really remarkable. This is how it works. So if I can take away the role of a woman or a man in nurturing and raising up their children, I can harness their ability to be under my shoes. That's where we get workaholics from. And when I say workaholics, I'm not really talking about the kind of work that is honorable. I'm talking about the kind of work that takes a man away from their family to the point where their family becomes second nature, because they've allowed themselves to capitulate to the mindset of these corporate bosses that have no desire to minister to the family structure around the people that work for them. So 100 years ago, that's where the creation of schools came. You guys might not realize this, but the way that children used to be educated prior to 100 plus years ago was by mom and dad. Mom and dad did the educating. Mom and dad were the ones that sat people down and educated their children. Mom and dad were the ones that took their children to work. Mom and dad were the ones that taught their children to put their hands to the plow. Mom and dad were the ones that educated their children in the craft that they have developed an understanding in. Mom would take the girls out into the field and teach the girls how to care for their younger brothers and younger sisters. They would learn to become excellent homemakers, and in many cases become the most productive and important part of the structure of the family, while men oftentimes would take their sons to work with them, would teach them again and again and again and again and again how valuable they were as they put their hands to the plow to do the work that God had called them to do. That's all been gone. There is no take your child to work day. Look, the way it used to be when parents took their children to work was it was a work training job. It was training day. Now children are taught to be docile. Children are taught to sit and to be entertained. And if they can't be entertained, then they lose their minds because they have no purpose or call from within them. No wonder why suicidal ideation continues to increase amongst that age group. And this is where it got worse. Upon the destruction and the abolishment of the family, the public school system has always been and will continue to be a brainwashing center for children. It's a place where children are groomed. It's a place where children are attacked. It's a place where children learn to walk away from the beautiful familial structures that God had created. And if you want evidence of that, think of the way it is here in the United States of America. Just think about it. If you are 18 years old and you're not living outside of your house, you are considered to be some lazy bum that chose not to do anything special with your life. When the biblical model basically says you only leave your house when you get married. But the idea is this. The enemy started working on this stuff 100 plus years ago, folks. He started attacking the family structure easily 100 years, at least actively in the United States of America. At the time when our founding fathers established this nation, it was founded on a premise that was distinctly and uniquely biblical. It wasn't economic. And the reality of it is the family has been powerfully attacked. I'm going to tell you this right now. I'm not saving up for my child's college education. That's crazy. I will develop a working, living wage that will one day be used to make an investment in a decision that my son chooses to make in potentially starting his own business and developing entrepreneurially speaking, as well as my daughters. You know the best thing about what we choose to do, me and my wife have chosen to do for our daughters? We want to create an infrastructure for our children that is so solid that they will never have to feel like they have to run into anybody's arms and able to experience the kind of security that they feel like they need to have so that they can do whatever God has called them to do. I want my children to be able to say, God told me to do this, and there are no financial constraints that keep them from being able to do that. We're not going to do that, by the way, by sending our children to public school. We're not. We're not going to do that by allowing our children to be brainwashed by government organizations. We're not going to do that by teaching our children to basically say that it's acceptable to stand as status quo in order to be able to experience what we call the American dream. Folks, the existence of the American dream has actually become the American nightmare, and it is based on satanic inspiration in the desire to achieve something that is completely unachievable because it sits in a context outside of the inspiration and the filling and the anointing of the Spirit of God. Let me just say one last thing. Please be willing to pay the high price. Please. The price is worth the admission. It is. So what if you get kicked out? So what if you get put down? So what if all of those things happen? God has a way of making it right. God is good. He glorifies himself through all of this, you guys, right? He's faithful. The funny thing is we know God already won. So we don't ever have to worry about what the outcome is going to be because he's good. That's how it works.